Part 1. The Brownstone opens its doors. Archie Goodwin narrating. The records will show that on a particular Tuesday afternoon, the brownstone on West 35th Street surrendered its usual quiet for a peculiar kind of bedlam. Not the kind of noise you'd get from a police raid or a fist fight in a back alley. No, this was a more refined kind of chaos. It was a chaos that wore perfume, carried parasols, and mispronounced the names of orchids. The Manhattan Flower Club was in session, and for reasons known only to the devil and to Nero Wolfe, our house had been chosen to host it. Wolfe's orchids, his pride, his obsession, his children, were the main exhibit. It was a colossal error in judgment, and I, Archie Goodwin, had told him so in plain English the week before. The first mistake was agreeing to it at all. The second was Wolfe's decree that I should stay upstairs with him and Theodore, mingling with the guests, a fate worse than death, or at least worse than a slow afternoon sorting mail. Now, if you've never mingled with the Manhattan Flower Club, count your blessings. For an hour and a half, I circulated among them. I grinned like a toothpaste ad. I shook hands. I let old women pinch my arm as if testing the ripeness of a melon. I nodded while a bespectacled gentleman explained how he once convinced a stubborn begonia to bloom by reading Shakespeare to it. By the end of the first circuit, my grin had set like plaster. The club was supposed to be exclusive, the cream of New York's gardening elite. If this was the cream, then the city was in dire need of a new cow. The men were tolerable, fussy, pompous, a little pompous about their Latin names for flowers, but tolerable. The women, well, it would have been a relief to spot just one who might make my grin start further back, closer to where a real smile begins. There was, in fact, one. She was standing off to the side, half hidden behind a bank of Miltonias, a brunette with dark, restless eyes. She didn't look like she knew a phalaenopsis from a philodendron, and she didn't look like she cared. Her gaze moved, not over the orchids, but over the crowd, darting from face to face, her body tense with a nervous energy that seemed at odds with the polite chatter around her. I made my approach. "Excuse me, miss. Any questions about the orchids I can answer?" Her eyes flicked to me, cool and disinterested. "About what?" "I haven't any questions about orchids at all." That was charm off the table. I gave her a smile anyway, the kind I keep for hopeless cases, and moved on. But I didn't forget her. Something about the way her fingers twisted the strap of her handbag, or the way her shoulders tightened when someone laughed across the room. She was like a cat in a room full of rocking chairs, and I've learned to trust my instincts when a person doesn't fit their surroundings. By the time I'd made 3 laps around the greenhouse, the fixed grin on my face felt like it might require surgical removal. I excused myself, slid down the stairs to the office, and claimed a little sanctuary. The office was my haven. The sturdy desk, the familiar creak of my chair, the silence thick as a quilt. I poured 2 generous inches of bourbon into a glass, propped my feet up, and took a long sip. The silence was beautiful. It lasted about 4 minutes. The door opened. It was her, the brunette. She slipped inside and closed the door quickly behind her, pressing her back against it as if she were holding off a mob. "Well, hello," I said, not moving my feet from the desk. "Change your mind about orchids? Or did the begonias insult you?" Her voice was tight, a wire stretched to breaking. "Could I have a drink?" "Sure. Scotch? Rye? Anything. Quick." She didn't wait. Before I could rise, she crossed the room, snatched my glass, and drained it in a single swallow. The shudder that went through her wasn't about whiskey. It was something deeper, like a quake starting from the inside. She turned her eyes on me at last. "You're Archie Goodwin." "And you're the Queen of Egypt," I replied, because habit dies hard. She thrust out a hand. It trembled violently. "Look at me." I'm all to pieces. I set my feet on the floor. She wasn't joking. Whatever had her tied up in knots wasn't the kind of thing a wisecrack could smooth over. "You do seem a little upset," I said. "When I saw you upstairs, I want to see Nero Wolfe," she cut in. Her words tumbled out in a rush. "Right away. I want to tell him something before I change my mind. And then I'll get a job at Macy's or marry a truck driver. But I want to see Nero Wolfe now." And right there, the calm of the office cracked and the afternoon took its first step toward murder. Part 2. The Woman in the Office. Archie Goodwin, narrating. There are moments in a man's life when he realizes the universe has stopped playing fair. For me, that moment came when Cynthia Brown, though I didn't know her name yet, leaned against my office door as if the walls of the brownstone were the only thing keeping her alive. "I want to see Nero Wolfe," she said again, her voice low and urgent. Now, Nero Wolfe is not a man who tolerates interruptions, especially not during a flower club exhibition in his beloved plant rooms. Getting him to step away from orchids and polite chatter was about as likely as getting him to trade his beer for a glass of carrot juice. "You'll have to excuse the timing," I told her. "Right now, Mr. Wolfe is occupied with our distinguished guests, and if I drag him away for a stranger with shaky hands, I'll be the one getting strangled." Metaphorically speaking, her hand trembled harder. She crossed to the sideboard, spotted the bourbon bottle, and poured herself another drink, this one spilling down the side of the glass. She gulped it as if every swallow was a race against time. Then she turned to me with eyes that were sharp, desperate, and strangely defiant. "I'm not a member of that flower club," she said. "I don't belong here. I was a guest, invited. A mistake." "That's nothing to panic about," I said. "Half the people upstairs are mistakes, including me." She ignored the remark. Her voice dropped, trembling on the edge of confession. "My name is Cynthia Brown, and I'm a crook. That's the kind of statement that'll put a dent in your afternoon." "You don't say," I muttered, trying not to sound impressed. "Yes, I do say. I've been mixed up with a man named Colonel Percy Brown. No relation. He's a con artist, a grifter. We were working a game together, playing a rich widow named Mrs. Orwin. I was supposed to play the decoy, smile at the right time, look glamorous, and make the pitch believable. It's nothing I'm proud of. It's just what I've done." She took another swallow from her glass, then set it down with a clatter that echoed in the office. "But that's not why I'm here." I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms. "Then let's skip to the part that is." Her eyes narrowed, her voice cracking. "It's about a friend of mine, Doris Hatton." She paused, searching my face to see if the name meant anything. It didn't. I shook my head. "She was a friend once," Cynthia went on. "As close as someone like me ever comes to having a real friend. We ran in the same circles. Cheap apartments, cheap men, cheap schemes. But Doris, she wanted better. She thought maybe she could climb out of it. She met someone. I didn't know who. She was secretive, almost embarrassed. But I swear, Archie, she tried. And then," her voice dropped to a whisper, "and then she was killed. Strangled, a yellow silk scarf around her throat." The air in the office tightened. I didn't speak. I let the silence push her forward. "I was there that afternoon," she said, her words tumbling out like stones. "I'd stopped by her place to talk." She was in the bathroom, fixing her hair. I heard the key in the lock, the door opening. A man walked in, tall, strong, confident. He stopped and stared at me. I thought maybe he was one of her benefactors. So I mumbled something about leaving and I slipped past him. I didn't think twice. I went to a cocktail date. Later, when I called to check on our dinner plans, she didn't answer. The next day, her body was found Cynthia's hands twisted in her lap. If I had gone to the police, if I had told them what I knew, maybe they could have caught him. But I was afraid. Afraid because I was a crook. Afraid because they'd laugh at me, call me a liar, or worse, charge me as an accomplice. So I kept my mouth shut, and he walked free. She lifted her face then, her eyes burning with something raw. And she was my friend. I leaned forward. And you saw him again today. That's why you're here. Her lips parted, a sharp intake of breath. Yes, in the plant rooms, among Wolfe's orchids. I was standing there, pretending to care about flowers. And then I saw him, the man from Doris's apartment. He hadn't changed, the same posture, the same face, the same hat. I was so shocked I couldn't move. He looked right at me, and in that instant, I knew. He saw that I recognized him. He saw that I knew. She pressed her hands together as if trying to stop them from shaking. That's why I came to Wolfe. He has a reputation. He's a deterrent. If I tell him, if I tell you, then maybe the man won't dare come after me. Maybe I'll live long enough to turn myself around. To be something better than a grifter's decoy, I let out a slow breath. All right, Cynthia. That's a start. So who is he? What's his name? Her eyes darted away. I don't know. That's a problem, I said. I'm saving it for Wolfe, she replied stubbornly. I'll tell him. Not you, Wolfe. He'll know what to do. The conversation was going in circles, looping tighter around her fear, and then, like the strike of a gong, the speaking tube rattled. Archie! Wolfe's voice bellowed through the pipe, thick with irritation. What the devil are you doing down there? Come up at once. I muttered something unprintable. I'm with a prospective client, I called back. This is no time for clients, Wolfe thundered. Come at once. I looked back at Cynthia. She was pale, trembling, clutching her empty glass like a lifeline. Stay here, I told her firmly. Keep the door closed. No one will disturb you, and when I come back, you'll have your audience with Wolfe. Deal? Her lips quivered. Just hurry. I nodded, gave her what I hoped was a reassuring smile, and stepped out. As I closed the door, I turned back for one last shot. What's his name? I don't know, she whispered. It was the last thing she ever said to me. Archie Goodwin, narrating. If I'd known what would happen in the next 20 minutes, I would have broken Wolfe's rules. I would have dragged him down those stairs by his oversized lapels. But hindsight is always sharper than foresight. And in that moment, I believed she would be safe behind the office door. I was wrong. Part 3. The Yellow Scarf. Archie Goodwin, narrating. Upstairs, the orchids were still the stars of the show. Wolfe sat in his oversized chair like a scowling Buddha, while I waded back into the human jungle of the flower club. My grin was back in place, automatic, lifeless, but my mind was still downstairs, with Cynthia Brown trembling in the office. I found Mrs. Orwin and her entourage clustered around a table of Miltonias. There was Eugene, her lawyer son, as stiff as a corpse in a law library. Colonel Percy Brown, the con artist in military drag, and Jean Percy, who could slice you open with a remark and smile while doing it. I delivered Cynthia's excuse. She hadn't felt well, had gone home early. Colonel Brown clucked his tongue with concern. John Percy sniffed that 3 martinis would cure any woman's nerves. Eugene Orwin simply looked bored, as though murder or migraine were both inconveniences equally beneath him. I left them and made another circuit, this time not as a host, but as a hunter. My eyes scanned faces, gestures, hands. Who had Cynthia recognized? Which one of these so-called flower lovers carried murder in their pockets? time dragged. Wolfe glared at me once for being too slow with a canapé tray. I glared back, thinking of the woman waiting in the office below. It wasn't until nearly 5 o'clock, as the last of the guests began drifting out, that I noticed him, a man at the north bench, leaning too close over a prized Miltonia. His fingers weren't the careful, delicate touches of a gardener. They closed around the pot with a brutal, possessive grip, thumbs pressing hard, as if he meant to crush the life from the plant. It was the kind of unconscious gesture you see once and never forget. I followed him as he moved toward the exit, but the stream of departing guests swallowed him, and in seconds, he was gone. That's when I heard it, a scream, high, sharp, and filled with horror. It came from the direction of the office. The crowd froze. I ran. Mrs. Carlyle, the fluttery, vague wife of a wealthy industrialist, came stumbling from the hallway, her face white as chalk. She pointed a shaking hand. "In there!" I knew before I pushed the door open. Some things you feel in your bones. She was on the floor, beside my desk. The yellow silk scarf was tight around her neck, pulled so hard it bit into the flesh. Her eyes were open, but empty. Cynthia Brown had gotten her audience with Nero Wolfe after all. Music swells briefly, then drops to a low, ominous hum. Archie Goodwin, narrating. The aftermath was chaos. Guests shrieking, Fritz trying to calm them, Theodore storming down from the plant rooms, demanding to know what had happened. And then, inevitably, Inspector Kramer. He arrived with the fury of a man who both hated and relished the job before him. Homicide had landed on Wolfe's doorstep again, and that meant headlines for him, headaches for us. His expression was a mix of duty and something close to glee. "You had a woman in your office," he growled, "who named a killer in your house. And now she's dead. What the hell do you call that, Goodwin?" "I call it bad timing," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. Kramer wasn't satisfied with sarcasm. He sealed the office with yellow tape, barring Wolfe from his own sanctum. He commandeered our dining room for interrogations, and he lined up the suspects like flowers in a row. Mrs. Orwin, tight-lipped, her son Eugene hovering like an undertaker. Colonel Percy Brown, smiling blandly behind a wall of legal phrases. Jean Percy, acid-tongued, her remarks cutting deeper than any cross-examination. Homer Carlyle, blustering about his reputation and his wife's delicate nerves. Ellen Carlyle, pale and fluttery, as if she might faint at the mere mention of death. And a newcomer to the scene, a psychiatrist named Dr. Morley, who seemed fascinated by everyone's reactions, as if this were all a clinical case study. Wolfe endured it in silence, his massive frame sagging into the dining chair like a storm cloud waiting to burst. The only time he moved was to order Fritz to bring a tray of sandwiches and coffee, a magnificent gesture of defiance against Kramer's intrusion. The interrogations were a waste. Eugene insisted his mother had nothing to do with Cynthia. Colonel Brown wrapped himself in so much legal jargon you'd need a crowbar to get through it. John Percy sharpened her tongue on everyone in the room. Homer Carlyle thundered about lawsuits. Ellen Carlyle murmured about Wolfe's famous globe and looked as though she'd prefer to be anywhere else. Dr. Morley offered psychoanalytic gems that meant less than nothing. Finally, Kramer threw up his hands. He marched them all downtown, leaving our house in disarray, our office sealed, and our nerves frayed. When the door shut behind him, silence fell heavy as a shroud. The yellow police tape across the office door glowed in the lamplight, a scar across Wolfe's domain. Wolfe opened his eyes, dark as storm clouds. "Archie." A conclusion, I leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "I'm listening." He spoke slowly, his voice steady with controlled fury. "The killer saw Cynthia enter the office. He knew she had been with you. He would be desperate to know what she had said. Such a man would not flee. He would stay to observe, stay to watch. I nodded. So he's still among the group Kramer just marched out of here. Precisely. But which one? Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Consider her words. She said she would not have recognized him if he hadn't had the hat on. A telling phrase, Archie. No man wears a hat in my plant rooms. It is a rule. But the women, nearly all of them, wear hats. The truth struck me like a blow. So the killer Cynthia saw at Doris Hatton's apartment was disguised. A man, she thought. But today, she realized, it was a woman. It is the only inference that fits the facts, Wolfe said. The same person. A woman in disguise. A woman who had access to Doris Hatton's apartment. A woman with motive. Not a thief. Not a random killer. A jealous wife. His eyes closed again, but not in weariness. In calculation. I didn't need to ask who he meant. The image was already in my mind. Ellen Carlyle, vague and fluttery upstairs, pale in the dining room, but with something behind her eyes that might not be nerves at all. The orchids had borne witness to murder, and Wolfe had just torn the disguise away. Part 4. The Trap is Set. Archie Goodwin narrating. Wolfe's brownstone had never felt so foreign. The orchids upstairs glowed under their lamps, oblivious. The yellow tape across the office door glared like a brand. And in the dining room, the echoes of Inspector Kramer's voice still clung to the walls like smoke after a fire. I stood by the window, looking out at the street, where the last of the Flower Club stragglers were climbing into cabs. Wolfe sat in his oversized chair, his eyes half closed but his mind racing like a locomotive. At last, he spoke. Archie, we will not wait for Kramer to stumble upon the truth. We will bring the truth to us. I raised an eyebrow. I assume you've got a plan that doesn't involve inviting them all back here for tea. Not all of them, Wolfe replied. One. Only one needs to return. He gestured toward his desk, or rather, toward the office door sealed by police tape. His voice hardened. You will write a note. A simple one. It will say that you know more than you revealed, that you wish to discuss it. Privately, I frowned. And if she takes the bait? Wolfe's lips curved in the faintest suggestion of a smile. Then she will reveal herself. Guilt is a restless companion. It drives one to rash decisions, so the note was written, signed in my hand, bait dangling like a worm on a hook. The next morning, the phone rang. The voice on the line was low, strained, deliberately disguised. But the words were clear enough. A meeting that night near the East River. A warehouse. I told Wolfe. He nodded, as if this had been inevitable. You will go, he said simply. I let out a laugh. Of course I will. Why not stroll into a trap blindfolded, whistling a tune? Sounds like fun. You will not be blindfolded, Wolfe said. Saul Panzer will follow, as your shadow. You will not see him, but he will see you. And he will see her. That was supposed to be reassuring. Somehow it wasn't. That night, I drove to the rendezvous, a battered warehouse that leaned against the East River like a drunk against a lamp post. The wind cut cold, carrying the stink of salt and oil. I parked, waited. The silence was heavy. Then a kid on a bicycle appeared, no more than 12, tossing me a folded scrap of paper. He didn't linger. By the time I unfolded the note, he was gone. The instructions inside were maddening, a series of turns, streets, alleys, a maze designed to lose a bloodhound. I drove, and every time I checked my mirror, I saw it, a blue sedan, hanging just far enough back to pretend it wasn't following. No headlights in the alleys, no horn on the turns, but always there. For an hour, I played their game, winding through the city's veins until finally, the streets opened to another warehouse. This one darker, more deserted than the first. Two men stepped out of the shadows. Big, efficient. The kind of men who didn't ask questions, didn't give answers. They relieved me of my revolver, tied my wrists with rope that bit into the skin, and marched me upstairs into a barren room. The chair they put me in was wooden, straight-backed, uncomfortable by design. The ropes were tight, practiced. They'd done this before. One of them spoke in a flat voice. "He just wants to talk. No trouble." Then they left me in silence. The door opened. She walked in. Ellen Carlyle. But not the Ellen Carlyle of the Flower Club. Not the vague, fluttery society wife who stammered about Wolfe's globe. This Ellen was something else entirely. She moved with a calm, cold grace, her eyes sharp and assessing. She wore a man's overcoat, gloves, her hair pinned tight beneath a hat that seemed almost too deliberate. Her voice, when she spoke, was low, steady, controlled. "Hello, Mr. Goodwin. Would you have known me?" I studied her face. The makeup was gone. The softness replaced by something hard and angular, and the voice, no trace of flutter or tremor. This was the real Ellen Carlyle. "Not for a million," I said honestly. "So," she said, stepping closer, "she told you about me." "She did," I admitted. "About Doris Hatton. About recognizing you yesterday. Ellen's eyes were cold steel. She's dead. There's no evidence. You can't prove anything." I gave her a thin smile. "Then you're wasting a lot of energy on that disguise." For the first time, her composure wavered. She reached into her pocket and drew out a length of yellow silk, the twin of the scarf that had ended Cynthia Brown's life. The room seemed to shrink. I talked fast, playing my only card. "Wolfe knows. He's got a note in his files, written by Cynthia herself. If anything happens to me, he'll open it. Your name's on it. A bluff, but a good one." Her eyes narrowed. "You're lying." "Maybe," I said. "But are you willing to gamble on it?" She weighed it, the scarf dangling from her fingers like a serpent. I could see the battle in her eyes, risk against certainty, and then certainty won. "Goodbye, Mr. Goodwin," she said softly, and she stepped toward me. The scarf lifted. I braced, and at that exact moment, the door burst inward. Part 5. The Woman Behind the Mask. Archie Goodwin, narrating. The scarf was in her hands, the knot of death ready to tighten. My wrists burned against the ropes. I could smell the faint perfume on the silk, the same ghostly trace that clung to Cynthia Brown's corpse. Ellen Carlyle's eyes held no hesitation now. They were cold, fixed, and merciless. Then the door exploded inward. The impact rattled the windows. Wood splintered, hinges screamed, and the doorway filled with Wolfe's bulk. Immense, immovable, triumphant. Behind him surged Inspector Kramer and half a dozen of New York's finest, revolvers out, shouting commands. The room erupted in chaos. Ellen whirled, her scarf snapping like a whip. One of her hired thugs lunged back into the room, pistol drawn. Shots cracked, echoing in the cavernous warehouse. A bullet punched into the wall inches from my head, showering me with splinters. Kramer roared, "Drop it! Drop it, damn you!" The second thug charged, fists like hammers. Saul Panzer slipped from the shadows, quiet as smoke, and leveled him with a strike so clean it belonged in a training manual. The man crumpled, unconscious before he hit the ground. Meanwhile, Ellen fought like a cornered animal. The vague, fluttery society wife was gone completely. She moved with precision, her scarf flashing in wide arcs, striking at the policeman who tried to grab her. One officer caught the fabric and she spun, twisting it around his wrist, yanking him off balance before driving a knee into his gut. I struggled against the ropes, shouting, "She's stronger than she looks. Watch her hands." Wolfe didn't move. He didn't need to. He stood like a monument at the door, his voice booming across the melee. "Mrs. Carlyle, you are undone. Yield before you damn yourself further." But Ellen wasn't listening. Her eyes blazed, her breath sharp and ragged. She pulled a revolver from beneath her coat, small, snub-nosed, but deadly. She leveled it at Wolfe, and Wolfe, bless him, didn't flinch. He only raised one eyebrow, as if mildly annoyed at the inconvenience. "Shoot him and you hang," Kramer barked, leveling his own gun. The tension held for a heartbeat, maybe two. Then Saul Panzer moved. With a flick of his wrist, he hurled a length of pipe he'd picked off the floor. It struck Ellen's hand with a crack. The revolver clattered across the concrete. She gasped, clutching her hand. The scarf slipped free. The overcoat tore open in the scuffle, and at last the disguise lay in tatters. The woman who had fluttered and fainted through Wolfe's greenhouse was gone. In her place stood Ellen Carlyle in her true form, a cold, ruthless killer with eyes like sharpened glass. They cuffed her. They cuffed the thugs. Kramer wiped his brow, his face a storm cloud of relief and irritation all mixed together. "You had this cooked up all along," he snapped at Wolfe. "Sat there in your chair saying nothing, letting me haul them downtown while you already knew who did it." Wolfe sniffed, unimpressed. "I knew nothing," I inferred. The woman herself supplied the rest. "Words, Inspector. She said she would not have recognized him without the hat. But no man wore a hat in my plant rooms. Only the women. That is not a guess. That is logic," Kramer swore under his breath. "Logic, hell. You're a magician," he turned to me, scowling. "And you, tied to a chair, about to be strangled, and still playing poker with her. If we'd been 2 minutes later, then you'd have missed the show," I said lightly. "And Wolfe would never forgive you for that." Kramer growled something I'll spare the stenographer. The uniforms hauled Ellen and her bruised associates away. The warehouse emptied, leaving only Wolfe, Saul, and me. Saul cut the ropes at my wrists. I rubbed the red grooves, feeling the blood return. "Thanks," I muttered. Wolfe adjusted his hat. Not because he wore one, of course, but because he disliked being out of place, and a warehouse by the East River was decidedly out of place for Nero Wolfe. "Archie," he said, "we are going home." Later, back at the brownstone, the hated seals across the office door were broken at last. The air smelled of polish and paper and safety again. Wolfe lowered himself into his chair with a sigh of deep satisfaction. Fritz brought beer. I poured myself bourbon. Kramer had left in a huff, sour as spoiled milk, muttering about withheld evidence and manipulated suspects. He'd get his headlines. He always did. But Wolfe, he had what he wanted. The truth, drawn out by nothing more than words and patience. He lifted his glass. "Archie, what did she say, precisely?" I recited it. She said she wouldn't have recognized him without the hat. Wolfe nodded. There. The truth was in her mouth all along. She gave us the key. We merely listened. He drank. I leaned back in my chair, letting the office wrap around me like an old coat. The world was back on its proper axis. Another case closed, another murderer unmasked, and I made myself a silent promise. No more flower clubs, ever. Part 6. Orchids, Beer, and Closure. Archie Goodwin, narrating. There's a particular kind of silence that only settles after a storm. Not the silence of peace, but of aftermath. It carries the faint echo of shouts, the smell of gunpowder, the rustle of ropes cut too late. That was the silence in Nero Wolfe's office when we finally reclaimed it. The police seals were gone, the corpse long removed, and Inspector Kramer's parting grumbles still hung in the air like smoke after a fire. I leaned back at my desk, legs crossed, watching Wolfe with the satisfaction of a man who has nearly been strangled, but now has his bourbon exactly where he wants it. Wolfe was already 2 gulps into a frosty glass of beer, savoring it like a holy sacrament. His eyes were half closed, the corners of his mouth fixed in the faintest ghost of triumph. "Archie," he said at last, The woman was a fool. Which one? I asked. We've had a full chorus lately. Mrs. Carlyle. To think she could kill twice and remain unseen. To assume disguise can withstand scrutiny forever. To ignore the force of words. He shook his head. Utter folly. I sipped my bourbon. She fooled Kramer. Fooled me too. Had me convinced she was just a jittery society wife with too much gin in her veins. Phooey. You are suggestible, I let that pass. After all, I was still alive to be insulted. Kramer had left in a state of controlled fury. He'd gotten his killer, yes, but not his way. To him, Wolfe's patience wasn't logic. It was obstruction. To him, our silence wasn't deduction, it was manipulation. I could almost hear him ranting at the DA's office downtown. That blasted Wolfe knew the whole time, sat on it till the body count doubled, and then swooped in for the headlines. And in fairness, maybe he had a point. But then, Wolfe had one too. He always did. Archie, Wolfe rumbled. The law requires testimony, not insight. We supplied the one when we had the other. Kramer's bluster is the noise of a man unwilling to admit he overlooked what was before him. Sure, I said, but don't expect him to send us Christmas cards. Wolfe's lips curved in something dangerously close to amusement. We went over the case one final time, not because Wolfe needed to, he'd already tucked it neatly into the filing cabinet of his mind, but because I wanted to hear the gears click. It always fascinated me, the way he built the chain. One link. Cynthia Brown, desperate and frightened, claiming she wouldn't have recognized him without the hat. Second link. No men wore hats in the plant rooms. Wolfe's rule, ironclad and absolute. Third link. Therefore, the figure she recognized was a woman in disguise. And from there, the rest followed with the inevitability of a rolling boulder. Wolfe spelled it out with deliberate calm, sipping beer between each point. To him, deduction wasn't drama. It was inevitability, gravity. I poured myself another drink, listening. Outside, the city hummed and groaned, but in here, the world felt orderly again. Wolfe, firm, quiet. She believed a disguise could erase motive. She was wrong. The disguise hid her face, her voice, her manner. But motive, Archie. Motive leaks through every crack. It is the one garment no murderer can discard. I didn't argue. He was right, and I had the rope burns to prove it. By the time the second round of beer and bourbon was finished, Fritz had peeked in to announce supper. Wolfe, of course, intended to eat in the dining room, as if nothing in the world had happened. I stayed behind for a moment, looking at the yellowed patch of carpet where Cynthia Brown had fallen. The rug had been cleaned, the stain removed, but memory doesn't lift out so easily. She had come here terrified, looking for safety, hoping Wolfe's shadow could shelter her. She hadn't gotten what she wanted. Instead, she'd given us the one phrase that solved everything and paid for it with her life. I raised my glass in her direction, silent. Then I followed Wolfe to supper. After supper, Wolfe returned to his orchids, grumbling that they had been left unattended too long. I returned to my typewriter, grumbling that my wrists were sore and my employer was impossible. Business as usual. And that, in a way, was the point. Life goes on. The brownstone keeps breathing. Wolfe keeps drinking beer, and I keep cracking wise. Somewhere out there, Inspector Kramer is still cursing Wolfe's name, and Ellen Carlyle is sitting in a cell wondering how a slip of phrasing and a silly rule about hats unraveled her entire disguise. The city won't remember Cynthia Brown, or Doris Hatton, or maybe even Ellen Carlyle, but Wolfe will. He always remembers. And me? I'll remember the scarf, the ropes, and the moment Wolfe filled that doorway like Judgment Day. One case closed, another waiting just around the corner, but I'll tell you this much. If the Manhattan Flower Club ever sends another invitation, I'm moving to Jersey. The end. Dear friends, we've reached the end of another Nero Wolfe story. If you enjoy these mystery-filled adventures, woven with clever deductions, sharp dialogue, and the timeless atmosphere of classic noir, then I invite you to stay with us here on the channel. The brilliance of Nero Wolfe and the wit of Archie Goodwin will return. More mysteries will unfold, more crimes will be exposed, and yes, even more orchids will bloom within Wolfe's brownstone. Every episode brings you another challenge, another riddle waiting to be solved. To support this journey, don't forget to like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. With your encouragement, we can continue bringing these classic detective tales back to life, enriched with AI-generated visuals and music, blending old-fashioned mystery with modern creativity. Our channel name is Nero Wolfe, and you can always find us at Nero Wolfe Mysteries. Until the next case, may your days be filled with intrigue, sharp thinking, and just a touch of noir.